everybody. Welcome to Whiskeys for Drinking, Waters for Fighting. And we're talking about water. And why are we fighting about it? Because we always seem to be. So we're going to talk today, really. Well, first of all, let's just introduce everybody. Let's just go around real quick. Just tell us who you are and where you're zooming in from here. John.
Hey, John Robitaille, CEO, Encore Green Environmental, Director, Carbon Asset Network, coming to you from Casper, Wyoming.
Darren.
Yeah, hi, Darren Smith. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Encore Green Environmental, and I'm coming to you from beautiful West Laramie, Wyoming.
Yeah, and you're scenically driving around. It looks like you're at least in your car anyway.
Yes, no, I pulled over because I tried one of these driving and it was dangerous. Yep. Yeah. Looking at the camera, too much distraction, Jeff. So I pulled over this time.
Either he's looking for a good signal or he's homeless. One or the other. We're not quite sure. So Neal, where are you zooming in from?
Well, it appears that by my camera, I am zooming in from someplace that's rather foggy. It's just the camera on my computer, and I haven't replaced it yet. But I'm zooming in from Billings, Montana, and I am the Director of Agronomy, and I'm a certified professional agronomist. So yeah, I said Director of Agronomy for Encore Green and Carbon Asset Network, and it's a dirty job, but somebody's got to do it.
Right. We're going to talk dirt here. So, and I'm Jeff Holder, and I'm coming from Los Angeles, and I'm director of the nonprofit Synergy for Ecological Solutions, who's dedicated to climate wellness through soil health. So the topic on the table today is actually something that many people who are listening know a lot about, some who have heard of it, and some have never heard of it. And it's this thing that's always kind of referred to colloquially as the coal bed methane days, right? It always adds days at the end of it. It's always the coal bed methane days. It was a season. It was a type of thing. John, you lived it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is, just for people who don't, bring us up to speed?
Sure. So to really dive into this, we got to go back a little bit. Back in the Cretaceous, there was a giant seabed, an inland sea, and it stretched, covered the northeast quarter of Wyoming, went into Montana, and a little bit into some of the Dakotas and Nebraska. And what happened was, as the continent started to rise, that sea started to dissipate, and it ultimately became a swamp. So over time, as you can imagine, that swamp was deposited. There was all kinds of very fertile vegetation in it, and then it dried up, and as things go, it got covered up and buried. Well, what we ended up with was a tremendous, very, very large, very thick coal seam in this area that we call it the Powder River Basin. And for many years, we had international coal companies in there actually mining this coal. And the way they would have to mine it, it was in itself an aquifer, meaning that the layer beneath it was impermeable. And so as the water would percolate down through the soil, it would get stuck in this coal seam. And so there was a tremendous amount of water in this coal seam. So in order to actually mine this coal, the mines would have to dewater the coal, meaning they'd have to pump the water off of the coal, the face of the coal. When they did, they realized that they were releasing a tremendous amount of gas. Now, everyone knew it was there. Nobody could figure out exactly how to take it out of the ground and capture it and use it in a manner that would be suitable for natural gas. So we fast forward to about the early 90s. We had some guys go out and try a new method of trying to capture this gas. And what they did was they drilled several wells very close to each other and put water pumps down the wells and started pumping that water off of the coal. And just in a non-scientific way, what happened was that when that water relieved the pressure, that gas was released from the coal and it went up the pipe. This essentially started a very large natural gas boom in and around the Powder River of Wyoming. It went into Montana as well. We had a tremendous amount of production for a while there. The Powder River Basin was the largest gas field in the United States. That included Alaska. So we were producing more gas out of that field than anywhere in the country. As time went on, like it does, natural gas is a commodity. And as commodities do, the prices go up and the prices go down. Price eventually went down to a point which made pumping these wells less economic. And many of the very shallow coal seams were already pretty well tapped out. So what we saw was many of these wells were plugged. Many of them were converted to water wells. Years prior, ranchers, that was about the only water they could find was in those coal seam aquifers. So people were using them. They were converted back to a water well for people to use. And then a little while later, a student in Gillette, Wyoming, came up with the idea that perhaps this gas is biogenic, meaning that instead of just being there from plant decay, there was actually a microbe in there creating the natural gas. And she did a study for a science fair and proved, in fact, that this gas was biogenic and it was essentially renewable. So that started a whole new trend. People trying to figure out how to provide enough nutrient to get these little bugs to produce enough gas to make the coal seam worth producing again. But over time, that kind of faded away as well, as again, the gas prices were just not supporting going out there and doing all of this additional new technology and finding new ways to produce this gas. So today we have very few left. We do have them. They are producing still, but there are not nearly what there was at the beginning in the early 90s. Potentially, we could all go back and drill that again and produce it again. But for now, we just don't really have the desire to go in there and do that. So that's kind of the rise and fall of coal bed natural gas in Wyoming.
And how does that relate to the idea of surface application, very technically, surface application of treated produced water? How does that get into there?
The coal bed water is very different than produced water, byproduct water, when we talk about coming from an oil well. I'm sure Darren and Neal can get into much more depth than I can. But it was a different soil that we dealt with. Think back to the Cretaceous, and we're talking about salt water. The area that we had, the surface we had was very salty. The soil was very salty, as I understood it, and Neal can get into much further detail. And this water was very well suited for things like livestock drinking, We had ideas about snow fences, living snow fences. We had golf courses being irrigated with this water. I believe Neal was involved in some irrigation projects. It was very, very beneficial water. It was very, very clean water in terms of what you would expect to find coming out of a gas well. It was a real boon for the state. What we have done is we've taken the ideas from coal bed. We've taken the positives from the coal bed days, and we've engineered something that we believe is perfectly suited to handle the much brinier water coming out of an oil well. But really, these other guys would be much more technically knowledgeable than I am on this.
Yeah. So if I understand right, then there was an era when some of the water that was coming out of an oil well, many people may or may not know that anywhere from 3 to 6 times the amount of water to oil can come out of an oil well, and that was what was being used to then do different things with the water. And Neal, also you were involved in some actual soil application of this. Is that right?
Yes, and I just wanted to go back on, John did an excellent job at describing coal bed methane. We never dewatered a coal seam. We only depressurized the coal seam enough, as John said, to take the pressure off, and the gas flowed up naturally and they trapped it. A lot of the coal seams they drilled into were between 400 and 1,000 feet, and they were never thick enough that they were going to go in and mine them. So this was a way of drawing off some natural resource value without having to dig 400 feet deep for a seam that was maybe 50 feet thick, and it just wasn't practical. So it was a great project. I got involved in 2001, and yes, I worked for a gas producer, and we did a lot of soil sampling, and we called it managed irrigation. The water is, again, getting back to quantifying, a lot of the water had conductivity, a salt load and we measured in micromoles per centimeter, around 2,000 to 2,600, maybe 3,000 micromoles per centimeter. Here in Billings, where I'm at, the Yellowstone River in the summer that river water runs around 300 micromoles per centimeter. So, and then we've mentioned oil production water, that, we're looking at 20,000. We had another project where we cleaned the water up and drinking water to meet the drinking water standards there in Wyoming started out at 93,000, and there's other places that it's well over 150,000 micromoles per centimeter. So it was a different beast. And the other thing that was a real large component of this was sodium bicarbonate water. So the primary ion in the water was sodium, the cation was sodium, and then the primary anion, or the negative charged ion, was bicarbonate. And those presented 2 different things in the soil. Sodium makes water soft, and then when that soft water hits the soil, it destroys soil structure, and then water doesn't go in. So we had to offset the sodium with prescribed amount of gypsum, which is calcium sulfate. Gypsum then knocks the sodium off the soil and leaches it, and then with the water, the sodium leaches through the profile, and the soil structure is returned. To deal with the bicarbonates, we had to put on 90% sulfur prills that would acidify and create sulfuric acid that would neutralize the bicarbonates, because the bicarbonates would tie up the free calcium in the soil and not make it so it could offset the sodium. And so that's your chemistry lesson for today. So next week we'll have a pop quiz, okay? But it was, there was places we put over about an 8-year period, we put 150 inches on a piece of property with a wheel line or side roll, however you want to call it. You couldn't tell we had ever been there because we kept up with the amendments. Now, the oil production water, we could do that for a period of time in the coal bed methane fields. Let me stay with that thought, is that those wells were only going to produce water for maybe 5 to 7 years. In oil production, the water the water production out of oil wells is much more long-term. And so we cannot take that high salty water and apply it to the land because it will immediately ruin the land. Whereas the low salter, much lower salty water of the coal bed methane, we were able to do that. And so it's a matter of soil and water chemistry and what can we do with that water. In oil production water, we need to remove the salts to a much lower level and make sure our calcium magnesium is in the right ratios, and the bicarbonates are not going to be an issue. So that's my take on it. It's a matter of just knowing your science and chemistry.
Yeah, I wish you understood the process a little better so you could explain it to us. That's a great deep dive. Thank you very much. So there was a season when there was this making use of this kind of water and that kind of thing. Why do we not do it today? Why was those abandoned? John, you kind of gave a history, different things. Sometimes just market conditions made us abandon certain kinds of things. So why are we not talking about doing that today? What stopped us?
I would say primarily economics, like John said. When Hurricane Katrina hit, I think that was in 2005, wasn't it? Natural gas was like $14 an MCF. And, now it's in the $2. Well, there was a certain cost to utilizing this coal bed methane water. And a lot of people, and including other soil scientists, that said we couldn't do what we were doing, but we did it, and we didn't ruin any land doing it. So that was kind of a high cost, is fighting lawsuits and the application of the water. A lot of the gas companies came in and worked with ranchers to do like what John said. They provided them with a house well, or they put in a stock well in the back part of a section that the cattle never went to because there wasn't any water there. All of a sudden, we had a gentleman, he figured that being able to have that water in new places increased his calf weights at weaning time in the fall by 50 pounds per calf. So that was a win-win thing. The gas companies would put up pivots. They would build ponds off drainages. They would, all the infrastructure for trapping the water, storing the water, and then they would pay for the electricity and the pivot maintenance, and we sprinkled it out on what was dry land through a drought, and actually raised hay there was like 5 years out of 6 that were a drought in at least the Sheridan and Gillette area. Well, that would have produced nothing, and here these farmers got to raise hay that allowed them to keep their cattle herd intact, and they actually had extra hay to sell at an expensive price. So, and then if they promised to allow the gas company to apply the water for 7 years, then they got the pivot. And now a lot of the pivots have been tied into Prairie Dog Creek and other flowing waters, and they've gone away from the inefficient use of water via flood irrigation, where they just put the water out on the soil, versus sprinkler irrigation, which is twice as effective. So in a lot of ways, it was a real win-win situation. And personally, I was never a part of any land that was ever ruined by applying the sodium bicarbonate water.
So this is what we have done with coal bed methane, and looking for new ways to dealing with water and putting water on the ground, because as we always talk about, it's an arid world we live in. So Darren, what are maybe some of the lessons we learned from this, and how can we start doing things now? Kind of start with you, right, Darren, but open up for everybody.
Yeah, sure. So Jeff, I think some of the key things that people remember from coal bed methane certainly was the water production, and the guys said it, but so a certain amount of water had to be pulled out of the aquifer to reduce the hydrostatic pressure, and then that allowed the gas to be liberated. But the interesting thing about that coal water is that it was fresh water. No treatment was needed for it, in fact. And in fact, the communities up in the northeast part of Wyoming, the Powder River Basin, use it as a drinking water source. It is the aquifer water source. And so the key message there is that even if you have clean drinking water quality water, you still have to have an understanding of soil chemistry to be able to apply it effectively without doing damage. And Neal mentioned the water was soft. It was dominated by sodium, and really the amendments that needed to be put back into it were hardness ions, calcium and magnesium, in order to keep the ratio between hardness ions and sodium to the point where it didn't cause any destruction to the clay structure. And so as we move towards different opportunities involving oil field produced water, that's the brinier stuff, the stuff that has far more salts. That's not suitable for putting on irrigated land because of the high salt content. We employ desalination technology. And so what we're essentially doing is we're taking this heavy brine, high concentrated water, and we're basically converting it to distilled water. And but so most people would think, wow, distilled water, that sounds good. You should be able to put that anywhere in the environment. But the lessons that we learned from the coal bed days are better be careful, because you could be doing some damage to the soil structure. So it's guys like Neal that help us. We understand the soil chemistry. We understand the soil. We understand the soil texture. We understand the soil chemistry. And then how I help with that is that I understand the water quality and what's yielded after desalination, and we're able to put some ions back where they're needed so that we can use this water to effectively irrigate with. So without our I'd say that without the lessons we learned from the coal bed days, boy, we could be making the same mistakes again trying to apply treated oil field water. So we are well ahead. We understand how to do it. We understand how to do it effectively, and we understand how to do it to greatly improve the crop production on this land.
So I have Marvin Nash is not on this podcast, but I'm just going to have to throw out the phrase Hansen graph. So people look that up if you want to, but that explains everything about, you got to have the sodium absorption ratio and the conductivity in the right ways in order for this water to be used. Another thing that we've learned from the coal bed methane days is they treated, because they put up the hardware and spent a lot of money on pivots and side rolls and the infrastructure, I think they thought that they wanted to put on a tremendous amount of water. Sometimes they put on 30 inches in a year, and they were, the issue I had, it wasn't with the water quality, it was the water quantity, that they'd be out there in November before to empty out the ponds, and they'd be applying water. And so then the water would sit in low areas and the alfalfa would yellow up. And so it was a matter of these plants had wet feet going into the winter. And like I said in a previous podcast, that roots carry on respiration, and we don't breathe very well underwater, neither do the plants. So that was a bigger issue than anything, was the fact that they were disposing of the water. So where we're taking it from here, and a big lesson learned, and Marvin talks about this all the time, is we're going to put on less water, but on more acres. So we will spread it out. We're looking at maybe 6 to 8 inches of water per year instead of 20 to 30 inches of water per year. So that was a big takeaway too.
And just the context for this is the company that we're talking about is Encore Green Environmental, that cleans up and treats any kind of industrial water, but including oil field water, to be able to then clean it up with all the proper permits and regulatory checklists, as well as to have soil testing. So it does what Darren's saying, is it matches the soil, and then that water then helps go onto the thirsty land. And so that's one of the contexts of what we're talking about here, is that water is for fighting, because we don't have enough of it in the arid West, and this is a way by which we can get water on the soil, and that's where one of the places water belongs, right? Is to help make the soil healthy. John, was there any other takeaways that this kind of coal bed methane world, or this environment, kind of gave us, that we're kind of doing well with now?
I think the guys hit it on the head. We have to be very cautious of the soil types. We have to match the water to the soil. That was a very, very important find. Something that I think Darren's absolutely correct in saying that, if we didn't learn that then, we'd likely be learning that now. And the other important thing is as Neal stated, less water on more acreage. That is absolutely critical. What we're talking about is putting water, making a dry year a normal year, and a normal year a wet year. We're not talking about putting so much water on that we're changing plant populations. We're simply increasing the amount of moisture available to these plants to increase growth, to increase any kind of grazing program you may have, to increase wildlife habitat, to increase any kind of forage that all animals would be satisfied with, to capture carbon out of the air. All these things happen with the addition of this water on dry, arid soils that we have here in the West. And I think it's very important to learn the things that we learned from coal bed are very, very important going forward to the success of actually creating a nicer, greener, thicker, more healthy West. And I really believe that. I think that was really very important for us to learn.
There was one other thing too that comes to mind. In the coal bed methane days, Jeff, there really was no options for deep well disposal. There was so much water, and frankly, in this part of the Powder River Basin, the disposal geology just did not exist. So this is a great example of how the industry and the environmental community became innovative. They innovated ways to beneficially use this water without putting it downhole. Frankly, it wasn't an option, but really what that means is that the energy companies made an investment in ways to beneficially use this water. And honestly, so when we contrast that with oil fields and the oil production that's going on now, that innovation still can exist. And we already know that investments in doing the right things with water still can be made. So that's the key to Encore Green's success, is that we're really encouraging the energy companies to rather than dispose of this water, just like we did in the coal bed days, and we're way ahead in our understanding on how to do it properly. We know the technology, we know how to apply it safely and effectively on soils. It's time for those investments to be made again to beneficially use this water rather than dispose of it downhole. We've proven it in the Powder with a heck of a lot more water than we're talking about in your typical oil field. So.
And I think that's the way to end this, is that we always want to be looking, how do we increase our water use? How do we take water that's earmarked to just be, quote, disposed of, and put it to beneficial use? That's the goal, because as we also said, all these things are connected, all the different things we talk about. More water on the soil makes better soil makes better vegetation, increases photosynthesis, that improves our air quality. It's really a linchpin. There's some things that a whole lever, you kind of move a lever and big heavy things can be moved, right? And it's really getting water onto the soil in the arid West is that lever, is that thing that when you pull that, all sorts of dominoes fall, all sorts of big heavy problems can be lifted. Tune in every Friday. We drop a new podcast right then. Like us, subscribe to us, write a review, tell us what you're thinking. Until next time, talk soon.